Hi, this is Alexcursus, a show where I take a look at some gunpla and see how authentic they are. This time, we are looking at the Gelgoog Marine. Gelgoog Marine MS-14F is a Gelgoog variant developed for the Zeong Marines. Now, you may be wondering, what does the Principality of Zeong, a space-based sovereignty, need for Marines? The answer is these Zeong military sort of treat asteroids, colonies, or smaller celestials in space as if they are island and the space as the sea. So the Marines' job would be breaching, landing, infiltrating the space colony, asteroids, or other smaller celestial bodies and fight as such. Thus, Marines. For the Gelgoog Marine, as we can see later, it would have quite a bit of addition from the standard model. I will be rating this kit based on saga, style, action, gimmick, and absence. Style. The Gelgoog Marine is actually the first variant of Gelgoog being introduced into the HGUC line. By just looking at it from afar, overall, it looks pretty accurate from its portrayal in the starter's memory, as well as what you expected from a traditional Gelgoog, unlike the other HGUC entries, where they got a bit stretched. Now that is partly because the startup's memory designs already have them stretch a little bit from the original Okawara ratio. But still, there's no mistake that this is a Gelgoog. Zooming to the head, now let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. I didn't use the sticker provided in the kit for the mono eye. This mono eye is actually the one from Scoop Dog. They have quite a few spares. The sticker provided is sort of a half eye, and it's kind of boring if you have quite a few Gelgoog and they all sort of have that kind of mono eye in the middle. So I decided to experiment a little bit. Unfortunately, there is a notch right in the middle to the eye track, so I make it that the Gelgoog is looking down to the side where the track opening is, demonstrating how useful it is. Otherwise, the construction is pretty, I don't think archaic is a good word here. It's actually pretty decent, being a sandwich with the front end and back end. What you see here is actually scope line. The assembly line is actually a bit further back. And then the pulse transmission conduits and the snout and the rest, or the lower half of the eye track, is a separate piece. So it's actually looking pretty good despite being quite old, part separation wise. Down to the torso, you may be surprised how it is constructed. And you can see how the chest have some assembly gap there, and how around the cockpit there is also a separate assembly line. The cockpit is its own panel, and then the chest is its own part. The rest of the body is its own part, along with the side of the abdomen assembled with the back. And we actually have a collar piece, again as separate parts. While you can see a assembly line here, They do have a bit of emboss on the torso. So again, despite being the very first Gelgoog in HGUC, it looks pretty good except for a bit of, I'm not sure if that's mold degradation or I'm just unlucky, that have a bit of step for the top of the clamshell assembly. Still, given its age, this arrangement is, I want to say, advanced. It's certainly a good way to keep your sprue in a certain thickness or your mold to a certain thickness. It is a very smart, at least, way to make your thick boy's massive torso. Down to the skirt, it is solid, completely solid, no movement at all. And it is just a simple front back and not what you expected today where you have a clever part separation along the skirt line. No, it's just front and back cut right down in the middle. And we are lucky the beam saber holster, yeah, it is a beam saber holster supposedly, are separate pieces. So despite being, I don't know, just a solid block, the skirt doesn't look too bad. And yeah, the separate color of apogee motors, just like the Gelgoog Jaeger, or Gelgoog Jaeger much like this one. But we'll save that for another video. So yeah, despite being a solar piece skirt, it is pretty good looking. Down to the legs, again, pretty good sculpt. If the part separation isn't a bit archaic, you can see here how the thigh is just split right down from the middle. Although I think it is a very clever design to sharpen where the thigh meets with each other, so that even if there is assembly gap, it is hidden right as an edge. I would also like to mention, you can see this circular feature here. It is actually a cap going from the inside, and both sides of the thigh is the clone, like you got two copy of the same sprue for the thighs, and you put the caps on left or right to, you know, assemble your left or right thigh. That is a very, very clever multi-mold or multi-function mold, and it provides a bit more detail than most thighs you see for HGUC in general. The knee, like most first wave HGUC, is a independent piece pretty much to attach to the polycap on the thigh and the lower leg. Slight unfortunate, or rather relatively new entry for the line. You got quite visible of where the polycap slash joint rotation supports are, but still looks good on most other angles. The shins are left and right like most Gelgoog, with a separate piece for the knee pad, but what's different, or in addition to most Gelgoog, is how the back of the calf is a separate piece. This is actually better than a lot of HG Gelgoog type of mobile suits, and it is following the armor assembly line, even, you know, to the sort of the trouser edge on the side. So surprisingly, the Gelgoog Marine looks very good at the back, even compared to the newer models. Like the knee have a bit of features, like not very detailed, but quite a bit of features that is not just a blank plate, nor just, you know, a few fullers, and, you know, that's it. Also a thruster, movable or a thruster array that's movable at the back of the skirt. A detail that, a lot of Gelgoog have this detail, but not a lot of them have such a wide array of movement. But I guess I should save that for action. The foot is pretty simple, just top of the foot, bottom of the foot. And then the padding is its own piece for a bit more detail. And then a separate heel. Now this heel is hollowed out, but the strut left inside is its own detail. So again, it's the bottom of the foot, but if you really care about it, it's not too hard to fill up the rest of it. And thrusters inside the trouser, just like other Gelgoogs. The backpack with additional propellant tanks. This is the main difference between the marine type and the standard Gelgoog. You have a bit of movement with the propellant tanks, but not a lot. And then separate parts for the thrusters and RPG motors. The main one in the middle is molded in. There is also a separate antenna as part of the plastic, again with its little safety flag so people don't poke their eye out, but I like it, especially it looks practical in the modern days. And onto the arms, you can tell this Gelgoog is older than other versions because the forearms are left-right clamshell instead of front-back, so you can see the assembly line in the front. But as unfavorable as that would be, we still got a separate piece for the forearm module, still the one piece bicep, still the inner shoulder, and then the shoulder armor as a separate piece. The shoulder armor, once again, for clever duplication. You see these fullers on the Gelgoog Marine's left hand side. They also exist on the back side of its right shoulder pads. Sure, that could be just a quirk of the model. I would like to think this is also how Xeon improved their manufacturing process for the Gelgoog. As for what these fullers actually do, I am not sure. It's probably just cosmetic. For the Marines, they want the side thrusters for their Gelgoog, so they got them. So yeah, overall, definitely an aged HG, but there are a lot of clever part separations that I think some modern kids can learn. Color separation wise, the Gelgoog Marine doesn't have too much of color separations. Some of the extra sculpt line or sculpt work isn't as crisp as you would see today, but at the time it's just welcome that it have any type of extra sculpt work. And so I will begrudgingly giving this a B for style, just because of how aged the sculpt looks, or how aged some of the part separation, especially on the forearm and the skirts. Not that modern kids don't do that, but modern kids definitely does it a lot more graceful or cleverly. They have no such luxury in their first entry with the Gelgoog. The Gelgoog Marine had to bite this bullet for other Gelgoog to run pretty much, or walk even. As much as I love some of the things they did, like the back of the calf and the foot, there are still enough to be picked apart. Like the tip of the shoulder armor, they don't have a assembly peg for it, so it's not locked in tight and would tend to open up if you don't glue it or do a seamless mod. These are things that would be improved over the next decades. So there are just a lot of little things that the Gelgoog Marine isn't doing quite well, and it is not smoking some of the newer entries as such. That's why I will keep the style at B. Next is action. Action isn't just the amount of articulations on the kit, but how useful they are. For the HGUC Gelgoog Marine, the head is using the forever HGUC polycap neck joint, but because of the way the collar is assembled, Gelgoog doesn't get a lot of swivel from the torso one, and the ball joint on the top doesn't really give you a lot of rocking action. You can pretty much just look side to side. The body, a bit of ab crunch because there are some space being left at the abdomen, so not a lot, but you know, a bit to make the Gelgoog Marine a bit more expressive. And then swivel is pretty good. Skirt, like we've said, is a solid block, so Gelgoog Marine can barely lift its thigh. And the knee, despite being double jointed, only move about 90. And with also the back skirt being a solid block, it have problem kicking its own ass. So while you can't really do a convincing kneeling pose, you can still do a pretty wide stand with the relatively generous room from the Gelgoog skirts. The thrusters at the back skirt, like we've mentioned, does have movement. That's a bit of bonus points. And the foot is on a ball joint. It does not have a additional swivel like some of the more well taken care of kits, but that is still quite a bit of kick forward. Again, facilitating a wide stand, and the thrusters inside the trouser does have a bit of movement. So yeah, a little bit of adding up. The whole arm is coming out from a single peg, with the shoulder armor basically just clamming the ring inside, but it's a decent system. Not foolproof, but easy to put back on once you paint it up. If you do, if you remove the shoulder armor, you got near 90° of lift. But even with the armor piece on, it's pretty good. The forearm module will fight the shoulder pads a bit, but you don't usually just go flat out, so should be good most of the time. You still get bicep swivel, just like early HGUC. And then the elbow go up to about 90. Not fully 90 degrees, but close to 90. And I would like to mention the elbow joint actually have a limiter for the forearm, which is pretty clever. Hand is in the ball joint. And so while there isn't a lot of articulation, at least for a Gunpla, and the articulation isn't particularly good again for a Gunpla, Gelgoog Marine can still pull off some naturalish poses. Having said that, none of them are very surprising, I would say. It's not quite a surprise that you get from the base model GM. And that is despite not really having an ab block and no skirt movement at all. Being a marine mobile suit, I suppose the Gelgoog Marine isn't supposed to have less agility than a standard Gelgoog, so I can't really give it an A. I have to keep the action at B. But it is a B because Bandai wasn't trying to give the Gelgoog Marines the road treatment. But there are still quite a bit of love poured into this thing, like the thrusters at the back skirt and inside of the trousers, as well as the joint limiter on the elbow that also serve as additional details. Next is Gimmick. Gimmick is usually the optional and onboard weapons on the mobile suit, as well as some additional functionalities. We had look at the backpack and the thrusters, so we have the weapons to look at. First, it's the Zeon's 90mm machine gun. There are Gelgoogs that uses the 120mm, but by the end of the war, Zeon is fighting mostly Federation mobile suits instead of Federation space jets and battleships, so they need a smaller caliber with more penetration, and that's what this 90mm submachine gun is. It is supposed to be the same model being used by the HGUC, but because the Stardust memory and War in Pockets have quite a bit difference in art direction, so they look a bit different. Otherwise, the HGUC version is just the version with a grenade launcher at the bottom. As for the kit, it is just a simple clamshell with the barrel having quite a bit of depth that you just don't see it simmering, which is good. Scope is pretty good, phenomenal even compared to the rest of the Gelgoog Marine. Next is beam sabers, dual beam sabers in fact. Presumably the Marines have to fight inside the asteroids and space colony as well, so the beam naginata would be a bit unwieldy in those places, and they opt for a beam saber instead with just one blade emitter. This kit also gives you a sword holding hammer grip for the right hand as opposed to the trigger finger, so you got options. You can use the trigger finger for sort of a handshake grip on your beam saber, or hammer grip with the standard grip. And you can totally just slide it in, and you can have it hold on the left grip as well. You will notice the beam saber is just clear all the way through. It's supposed to be in solid color. Bandai at this point just cast it in a single color, much like the GM, but this time it is clear, yellow, like Gelgoog's ought to be. I think it is a much more preferred alternative because transparent beam sabers are cool. But beam saber isn't the Gelgoog Marine's signature weapon, or at least for melee combat. The Zaku shield is, or the spike Zaku shield is. Presumably the Zeon Marines choose to use the Zaku shield instead of the Gelgoog shield because it is much smaller. So again, easier to wield, easier to maneuver, and presumably the Zeon Marines are also quite familiar with them being handheld with the Zaku 1. So yeah, this is their perfect CQB weapon. This shield have a forearm attachment point as well as a hand grip, but you can just remove the hand grip and have the beam saber as well if you wanted to. This kit also have a open left palm for your dramatic sword action, beam saber action, or just want the Gelgoog Marine to support its machine gun normally. But where's the fun in that? It's cooler to have a SMG on one hand and a combat shield on the other. And for the module, it is actually a 110mm rapid fire cannon or autocannon for the Gelgoog Marine. Presumably they want more reliability for their weapons, and that's why they have regular conventional projectiles instead of, say, the beam spot gun like the Gelgoog Jaeger or the extra thermal jets from the regular Gelgoog variants. It is kind of funny how this forearm cannon is a larger caliber than the machine gun, but considering they are probably for breaching and fighting non-mobile suit like other armored vehicles, space jets that the Sea Marine might encounter during their breach or infiltration, it makes sense. So for the Gelgoog Marine's gimmick, nothing is amiss. Everything is provided, even down to dual beam saber and a bit of additional hands for more expressive poses. We can also count the thrusters as gimmicks if we wanted to, much like what we did to the original base type GM, but there isn't really anything extra from the Gelgoog Marine, like not an additional bazooka or additional magazines, nor there are gimmicks to, draw the beam saber hilt out of the holsters like the Federation mobile suits. So it have to be just an A for gimmick. Last and certainly least for the Gelgoog Marine is absence. Sure, you can point out how it's missing skirt movement at all. You can mention how that snowball into a host of things that the Gelgoog Marine can't do, but at the same time, the fly drawing of the early HGUC isn't really that great to support it, and because Bandai used a simple peg for the shoulder joint, you can't really do much with the arms either, so a less than 90-degree elbow isn't hurting too much, and the Gelgoog Marine is just as expressive. The eye sticker is a bit unfortunate, but again, it's their first entry and it does exist, so I'm not going to be too harsh on them. And the fact that the Gelgoog Marine looks really good on the pack is kinda funny, if I have to say. I think Bandai learned, like there is even details right where the backpack normally blocks on the back of the skirt. I think Bandai learned their lessons after a while that not many people display their Gunpla with the back facing people, or even people going around the back. They are not really picking it apart as long as there are some details and not hollow. People are quite happy. So, I didn't even mention there are part separation for the inside of the shield. This is a much better shield build than even most Zaku, really. Despite the Gelgoog Marine pretty much stole this shield from the Zakus, it have a better shield than most of them. So yeah, I don't think there are any absence to speak of for the Gelgoog Marine. With the additional hands and the two beam sabers, I think we can give it an S. Pretty much to make up of all the harshness we put it through with style and action, because it is such an early build. Of course, it is still not Zork level of Bandai knock it out of the park on the first try type of success, but I think there should be some recognition. So, to recap, the HGUC 1-144 Gelgoog Marine is pretty good style-wise, despite being the first HGUC Gelgoog, despite mostly archaic part separation, including the forearm. It is overall done pretty gracefully. A lot of the part separation is, just archaic is the only word to describe it, but it turns out pretty great, especially the back of the calf being a separate piece, and the separate piece for the side thrusters. The multi-level build-up of the chest also turns out great. Oh, and the head. They turn out great, just that Bandai haven't really figured out how to do a good eye track for the Gelgoog yet, somehow. And a bit of misfortune of not providing tension for the tip of the shoulder pads. I have to keep the Gelgoog Marine AB for style. For action, being a first-gen HGUC, most of them are pretty bad by today's standard, but it is still pretty combat effective or tactical effective for the most part. And having app crunch is a lot more than some of the later entries. Very unfortunate that we don't have any skirt movement, but it's not like the skirt movement would help the legs action terribly much to begin with. So it is a B possible for the Gelgoog Marine. Gimmick wise, having a ranged weapon, having a shield that it's very secured with 2 attachment point, that's more than a lot of his HGUC brothers, especially the Federation one. Having both beam sabers in clear colors, even though they are just a single color cast, they are still transparent primarily. And then additional hands for both hands, that you can hold weapons on both hands. And then the thrusters on the skirts and the trouser being movable. That is excellent gimmick. Just that Bandai didn't throw in anything extra, maybe a stern thrust or additional magazine, then we can bump it up a bit more. But as it stands, Gelgoog Marine only gets an A for gimmick. Finally, for absence, Bandai left nothing on the table for the Gelgoog Marine. I mean, arguably, we can include a bit more weaponry. We can put back some mobility that should be there for the Gelgoog Marine. It would be nice if we get the beam saber hilt from the beam saber holsters, but you also get the nice shield inlay and shield grip that works with the forearm joint for the Gelgoog Marine, and then a separate barrel piece, a good scope for the rapid fire cannon on the forearm. Yeah, Bandai just left no crumbs. And with all the slight harshness we put the Gelgoog Marine through in style and action, I think we can give it an S for absence. So the verdict for the HGUC 1-144 Gelgoog Marine is B for style, B for action, A for gimmick, and S for absence. Overall, not quite the Zugok's knock out of the park straight away, but it is pretty much on par, if not slightly better, than the GM's overcommitment of being a mass production mobile suit. Price-wise, it is on par with the RX-78-2, and because that is the grandpa, and the Gelgoog Marine is a slightly larger model overall, I can't blame it. It is still the cheapest 1:144 HG Gelgoog that you can get, and so I think it is a good way to bulk up your Gelgoog army, even if you're not trying to build one from the starter's memory. Thanks for watching, see you next time.